Save you.
According to a recent FCC report, whites own 94% of commercial FM radio stations. Racial minorities, only 2.9%. And this is diversifying radio?
We really cannot take our existence for granted because although we exist today, there are forces out there to want to squash those voices.
I'm Eddie Robinson, and stay tuned as we chat with the first woman, the first Black American, and still the only person of color to ever own a radio station in the northeastern part of the U.S., radio pioneer Carol Moore Cutting. We'll also explore a new non-commercial station out in Denver operated by people of color and speak candidly with the general manager of The Drop, Nikki Sworn. I feel you. We hear you. I see you. This segment does contain language that may be offensive to some listeners. You're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson. Her name is Carol Moore Cutting. She's president, CEO, and general manager of Cutting Edge Broadcasting. She's the first and only female to ever own an FM radio station in Massachusetts, and the only African American to own an AM or FM radio station in all of New England. Carol, thank you so much for being a part of our show.
It is my pleasure. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
So, out of 11,000 commercial radio stations across the country, only 168 of them are owned by Black broadcasters. A bit of context here. Back in the 1930s and 40s, the government actually awarded broadcast licenses, particularly to white men. And it continues to ring true today, where people of color, minorities, and women remain underrepresented when it comes to license ownership. An organization known as the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters has been working for years to come up with ideas to try and expand Black ownership within this white-dominated radio industry. They've also been working with a congressman from North Carolina. His name is G.K. Butterfield. And he's been working to push Congress to pass a bill that would reinstate a tax incentive to help persuade media stations to actually sell their radio properties to more minorities and women. Now, this legislation was enacted back in 1978, and it actually helped to increase minority broadcast ownership to about 300 stations. But in 1995, a Republican-led Congress wiped away all those gains. Congressman Butterfield introduced this bill in 2017 and then again in August of 2021. 3 months later, in November last year, Butterfield announced that he'd retire this year after Republican-drawn maps put him in a toss-up district.
The map that was recently enacted by the legislature is a partisan map. It's racially gerrymandered. It will disadvantage African-American communities all across the 1st Congressional District. While I am hopeful that the courts will ultimately overturn this partisan map and see that a fair map is enacted, I have made the difficult decision that I will not seek re-election to the United States House of Representatives.
So, Ms. Cutting, decades later, we are right back to where we started from, where ownership of media properties for women and minorities remain limited. So here's an audio cut I'm about to play for you from the 34th President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. We lifted this cut from the infamous Eyes on the Prize documentary series, in which Eisenhower was making remarks around the mid-1950s during the desegregation of public schools, though he's not discussing anything related to radio and media ownership, none of that. But his remarks here seem to capture this mentality of superiority among whites, where blacks simply need to just hurry up and wait when it comes to experiencing equality and opportunity in this country. Here's the cut.
I personally believe if you try to go too far, too fast in laws in this delicate field that has involved the emotions of so many millions of Americans, you're making a mistake. I believe we've got to have laws that go along with education and understanding. And I believe if you go beyond that at any one time, you've caused trouble rather than benefit.
I played this cut because it seems like we're moving at the very same pace when it comes to black media ownership integration. You know, if I'm not mistaken, this fight for more minority-driven ownership of stations, both radio and television, has been going on for a very long time. Why has it taken so long for there to be more minority-owned stations? It just seems like a familiar record, no pun intended. Why aren't we seeing more radio stations in particular owned and operated by people of color?
What year is this, did you say?
2022. But you
know
know
what year it is now, but what year did he say this?
He said this like back in 1956, 1957.
Does that tell you something? I mean, the fact that that attitude still exists, not only in radio broadcasting, but in everything. Voting. I mean, we're going backwards from where it was when I grew up in Alabama. We're at a standstill. Actually, I think we're going backward. There are losses in black radio. Of course, the times don't help. There's still a lot of racism in advertising. And National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters, that organization has made an effort to call attention to the inequities in terms of black broadcasters getting the dollars even to be able to get advertising dollars even from the federal government. And so we're losing stations, we're losing broadcasters, and it really needs to be stopped. I don't know what's going to happen when Butterfield retires with that whole issue. Probably won't go anywhere.
Growing up in the South, you were born in Alabama. Of all the places in the South, you know, the state of Alabama was just insane. You had to have known firsthand about the treatment of blacks and how white Americans were really making a diligent effort to remove or even exclude blacks and minorities from holding any kind of power position or carry any kind of influence. Can you tell us, Carol, of a moment in your life that perhaps was the most racist, the most impactful moment that happened to you now, and realizing that it may have happened for you on some level, perhaps consciously or subconsciously, thinking back on it, it really helped trigger your desire. It instilled your passion to pursue your goal and what you wanted to accomplish in life. What was that moment?
I don't know. I think it was growing up in Alabama, that whole experience, living under segregation, having to go to segregated schools and get all the hand-me-down books, all those inequities, being called the racist names, but also having a strong family that was really crucial to who I am today. You know, in spite of the fact that we were called all kinds of names, and I grew up in a situation that we were very aware of our race. And my grandfather, for example, and I haven't said this to anyone before, but he was very clear about making sure we understood who we were and some of the obstacles. We owned land, he owned land. And just beyond that, there was an area that he took us to as little children, and it was a hanging tree. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
Yes. So that was a reality, and we weren't sheltered from it. We were, in fact, made stronger by the fact that we had secondhand books. Our bus had to wait for all the white buses to pass our school before we were allowed to leave. And coming through the town, they would call us niggers and everything else on the bus. But that whole thing, our teachers taught us that we could do anything that we could growing up. When my husband and I graduated and moved to Massachusetts, I did not know anyone in this area. Living in Springfield, Massachusetts was foreign to us. We didn't know anyone here. And of course, you look for radio stations to try to find out where the beauty salons, the barber shops, the churches, and all of that. And the church was very important to us. And so there was a void. All we saw where we lived were predominantly Caucasians. And so I kept wondering why. Why isn't there? And that is what encouraged me to want to find out, why don't we have any broadcast facilities here? And I learned that we had an AM daytimer down in Windsor, Connecticut, and an AM broadcast station daytimer also in Boston. Daytimers mean that you come on at sunrise, you go off at sunset. So it was part-time radio. And that's what really instilled me and got me curious about why not. And believing we're capable of doing anything that we have to make things better, I pursued that. And it took a lot of years.
In the 1930s, the government began rewarding these broadcast licenses to primarily white men. But in 1978, the FCC established this minority tax certificate program, and it provided a tax incentive to those who sold their majority interest in a broadcast station to minorities. It being repealed in 1995, the tax certificate did boost minority ownership from about 40 stations who were minority owned to just over 300. Could you share with us, because in 1984, you applied for a construction permit to build a station in Springfield, Massachusetts. Over the course of 15 years of court hearings and legal battles for the FCC to finally grant you a license to build WEIB FM, what were some of the challenges that you had to face and come to grips with, especially personally as a female, and as a black female, fighting to gain traction, to own your own station, to earn a piece of media real estate?
Well, it goes back to the fact that I've always been very community involved, and in fact, getting my master's degree from Springfield College in community leadership and development. And so I've always been vested in our community. And so when this frequency became available, and it was not a part of the frequencies that you were talking about, but when it became available, there was an existing broadcaster who also wanted that frequency. He owned broadcast facilities as well as television, radio and television. And so he met with me to ask me if I would basically be a front for him for a couple of years or a year and then go away. And when I refused, because that was not my intention when I applied for this construction permit to build the station, he told me point blank, well, I am going to litigate you financially out of the process. Now, when you file those applications, you have to put your financials into that whole application thing. He knew we had no money. And the fact of the matter is, we had suggested we would use used equipment and all of that in order to really get the station on the air. And we were prepared to do this. And so what happened was, at every level, I won And we went through several stages in that litigation. And I would prevail. And he would just appeal to the next level. And in fact, took me all the way to the D.C. Court of Appeals. All I can say is not only am I a persistent person, but determined, but also I come from a faith background. I believe in the power of prayer and relied on that. I mean, I couldn't be where I am without that. And in fact, during that time, I had a growing family and really couldn't afford it. But thanks be to God and a group of attorneys that said, this is not right, this isn't fair, and so we will help you. And I was able to eventually, after 15 years, get that construction permit to build the radio station. And of course, it's never quite that easy, and there are always obstacles and challenges.
Coming up, more with radio pioneer Carol Moore Cutting as she shares her experiences of discrimination as a media property owner. We'll also learn of a new public radio station in Denver operated predominantly by people of color, and it's already gaining popularity and some competition in the market. Another compelling segment of ICU you do not want to miss. I'm Eddie Robinson. We'll be right back. It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're exploring Black radio ownership and why it's taken decades for any significant amount of expansion and diversification of ownership to take place. Our special guest has been Carol Moore Cutting, President, CEO, and General Manager of Cutting Edge Broadcasting. She started the jazz station WEIB-FM in Springfield, Massachusetts back in the year 1999.
Come and join us at the WEIB-FM Cool, Smooth, and Soulful After Work Cool Down.
After she experienced years of court drama and legal red tape to obtain a broadcasting license. Keep in mind, she's worked diligently with the Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters to push for legislation that would create a tax incentive for other station owners to sell off their majority interests to more minorities. She speaks openly about her experiences being discriminated against as a media property owner. More of her story in just a moment. But first, I wanted to shed some light on a new public radio station in Denver that's building momentum in the local community out there as well as on the FM dial as it competes with other commercial stations in the region. ICU welcomes Nikki Sworn. She's the general manager and program director of The Drop 104.7 FM, and she joins us virtually from Colorado to talk to us about how The Drop dropped and the kind of reaction and response the station has received since it's been launched.
So we are a part of a unique cluster that was like a beta project from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting,
Corporation for Public Broadcasting,
CPB, in 2017 or so, 2016, a station in Chicago called Vocalo was born. It was a think tank project where there was a summation that there needed to be a different kind of relationship and conversation around culture, around independent artistry as it relates to music and radio. And there was a chance for public media, who we all know doesn't necessarily see people of color that way. And that was kind of part of it. And then we were born into the next piece. And we were part of the next round of funding. Our vice president of radio thought, what a great compliment to KUVO, and that radio format. A 35-year-old, at that time, I think it was 35 or 34-year-old heritage jazz station in a market that made it one by one. And it was culturally relevant, discussing issues within the Black and Brown community. And we had lost our Black radio station, KDKO, 1510 KDKO, AM station had went away in the late 90s due to radio consolidation. So there was an opportunity to be recognizing and delivering some things, right? So we started as a stream station on HD2. We were a stream station, and it was exciting for us because we were writing this history of the format. And recently, as in 2019, and during the height of the pandemic, and to that, we had an opportunity to kind of start to investigate a chance for us to be on a terrestrial dial. And we were not actually born on the terrestrial dial until, quiet as it's kept, we actually launched in January on MLK Day, but we didn't claim that victory until February of this year.
This year, as in 2021.
Yes. 2021 became our pivotal year, and we landed on the dial position 1047, right? And that has changed everything that we're doing. Having the addition of 1047 helped us gain relevancy.
There you go.
And I'm excited to see where we go as we continue to move forward.
And so that means that when people are in Denver and they tune to 104.7 FM, they'll hear the drop. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're in a dogfight with two other stations here, two commercial stations, one of which is a heritage station that I helped develop, a KS 1075. And the second one was another one that I helped develop at Flow 1071. And those stations, they're large stations, they're commercial stations with that commercial leaning side. What makes us different is that the station started as a love letter to the people. This station was all centered on even the name of the station.
The drop.
We didn't name the station ourselves. That's the story. The story is that we actually put some names out over social media and said, hey, there might be an opportunity for a new hip hop and R&B station to come to the market. If you could name a station, what would you name it? We had a couple names we threw in there. We let people write in. Mm-hmm. The drop was one of the names. We had the vibe, the beat. Some other people said power, and they threw in. So from the very beginning, the nuance of the ownership of the station belonged to the people from the beginning. And they picked our name as the drop.
The Drop 104.7 is Denver's newest hip-hop and R&B station that's making waves on the airwaves.
And so we said, okay, they're naming us, so everything that we do will be through the lens of the people. And we knew that formatically, the other opportunity we had was for the independent artists. Colorado is an intense place, but we buy more concert tickets per capita, almost more than LA and New York. We are at the top, and especially with hip hop. We have more sold out shows here than anywhere else in the country when it comes to hip hop music. So we know that there's an audience. It was a matter of how do we bring our localism? How do we bring our independent artists forward? We did it really well with pop music. We did it with country. We did it with rock. But we did not do it with hip hop. And we needed to sanction the culture. And the only way we could do that was if the people bought into it. And if we said one of our main tent poles is the fact that you'll hear an independent artist every single hour, at least once an hour, and then have two focus shows on a Saturday and Sunday where we're really exposing and deep diving and having great conversations around independent music. This is how we want to show up and serve our community. And we took the risk, and that's what we did.
So the drop was really a community push, right? In order for it to get up and running.
The community saw a value and a need. There was a necessity to have a station shaped like ours that really was reflective. Like when you call us, we actually played the song that you requested. You know, that's an old radio isotrope, right? It's not something that's contiguous right now.
Sure.
Because everything is so formulaic in radio. Sure. And we were like, hey, let's go back to the old school. You call us, we try to put something on for you. We play the independent artists. We know their friends are going to call, but it's cool. We're going to do it anyway. And so something just sparked within the community, and they said, wow, we were really missing this. We really love you. And we love the personalities because we're as real as we get, right?
Yeah, the community stepped in.
And the financial end of it became donors started seeing, and our funders I got off an elevator. This was an individual who had a long relationship within our organization, but had never really made a big commitment. She's well off, amazing. And I get off an elevator and I'm telling her I'm so excited because I'm headed to my show and I'm excited to be on the drop. And I get off and I tell her everything that's going on with the drop. 3 days later, she turned around and wrote a check for $167,000 in one swoop of a 10-minute conversation. And that also brought forward. And then the small mom and pop companies saw themselves reflected in our brand and how we were talking to our public. And those $500 deals turned into $1,000 deals. And $250 deals turned into $750 deals. And so we just did it brick by brick.
You're listening to ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson. As we continue our discussion about Black radio ownership, that was Nikki Sworn, General Manager and Program Director of a public radio station out in Denver, 104.7 FM, also known as The Drop. We'll get back to our chat with Nikki later in this episode, but right now, let's reconnect with radio pioneer Carol Moore Cutting, President, CEO, and General Manager of Cutting Edge Broadcasting out in Massachusetts. She's the only African-American to own an AM or FM radio station in all of New England. Blacks currently own some 168 of 10,315 commercial AM and FM radio stations in the U.S. These stations are concentrated primarily in the southern region of the country. Look, we all know the power and the influence of media. It was one of the main reasons why I decided to get into media and become a journalist. I graduated from Prairie View A&M with a mechanical engineering degree, but I later attended New York University for a grad school degree, a master's in media. I loved the more creative, the more content programming side of things when it came to broadcasting. But with media, the information, is transmitted, ideas are formed, emotions are produced. One of the main ingredients for media companies, how to get people to act or behave or how to spend their money or who to spend their money on. You mentioned earlier with advertisers, how to guide the right audience member to a certain product or service, that product or service owned by someone of a certain skin tone, if you know what I mean. So at the end of the day, Ms. Cutting, who owns that voice? Who owns that station? That has to be in good, decent hands. But when those hands aren't diverse enough, when those hands are of only one color, white, then there's a risk of programming there that lacks diversity, that lacks perspective, that lacks this understanding of another culture, of another race. Money tends to be directed to a certain group. What is the real roadblock, the real reason why Black ownership of radio stations continues to lag? Do you think it has something to do with advertisers? Do you think it really has something to do with white owners feeling threatened by a sudden increase of Black-owned media and the potential of growth that could really impact their own pocketbooks?
All of those. Actually, absolutely. In order to have a station, you have to be able to maintain it. That requires resources, and there are efforts to make sure that one does not get those resources and to try to get you out of or discourage you from getting into this business. And it also has to do with opportunity. There are only so many frequencies that are available in broadcasting. And if you don't have access to that ownership, you can't be a broadcaster. And if we're losing those opportunities, that is not good for whatever reason. And I tend to believe that, based on my experience, that a lot of it has to do with being able to access the advertising dollars. Now, it has been said, we being the large broadcasting companies who own the majority of the radio stations, they are not allowing others to get access to those stations. You find even when they sell them, because they're priced way beyond where we're able to get the financing for. And it's like a catch-22. Then when you do get one, the advertising dollars are not equal. And it goes back to the attitude that what we have doesn't have the value that their products have. A couple of my advertisers have told me they have in fact been told that they could serve the same people that we're serving, and they didn't have to include us in the advertising buy. And so I think it all goes back to accessing the opportunity of the frequencies not being available. And when you do have them, discrimination in advertising from your local all the way to the federal government, truth be told. So it's discriminatory. The bottom line, they don't value our products. Yet we are so critical to our community. That is what's so annoying. Because if we leave, who's going to service our community the way that we do? No one. Because that's not an interest of theirs.
How could Black Americans, Black entrepreneurs with an interest in media ownership cut through all of that? I mean, here you have something, for instance, with Clear Channel and the Infinity Broadcasting Unit of Viacom, two companies owning such a large share of the actual radio market. For instance, Clear Channel grew from 40 stations to 1,300 stations within a 7-year span. How can one cut through all of that? Will it take 15, 20 years for something to happen in terms of getting some sort of frequency?
What did Dwight Eisenhower say?
Replay the cut. Yeah, exactly.
No.
Exactly.
Seriously, you mentioned initially there were 300, and now you say there are 168. It's a sad process, and it's the state of America. Let's be totally honest. It's not just broadcasting. It's in home ownership and the value of your home. It's in just every business that you can think of where there is competition. You are going to have this. And I don't know where Clear Channel's heart is, or Infinity's, or any of those companies, but surely they are not in letting Black broadcasters join the broadcasting community, because otherwise, if they had stations for sale, they would seek them out. And they don't do that. So it's a sad situation, because it's shameful that I'm the only AM or FM commercial radio station in New England, or the only female-owned radio FM station in Massachusetts. But that's the way it is. And so it's my purpose has been to try to prayerfully hold on to this, because I know that if this goes away, do you think there's going to be another one? Or another broadcaster who looks like us in this market? I don't think so.
How's WEIB FM doing? Tell us more about your station and what you'd like our audience to know about its future.
As I mentioned, it's very challenging and there are many obstacles, but there's a determination to keep this station on the air in spite of COVID-19, which was a great excuse for what advertisers we did have to not advertise. And so I would like to see this station continuing with the ownership. I love what I'm doing. I love being able to do what I am doing. It would just be so much easier if we had the advertising support. Now, thanks to National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters, they've taken an initiative and have an advertising area that they are promoting and encouraging large corporations to advertise on Black media. And it is through an organization out of Nashville, Tennessee, that we're getting some national advertising in its spot set. And so that has been a very bright spot, but it hasn't been easy for that to happen. It's been a lot of years of bringing attention to the inequities that some of these companies show. And we've been able to get some advertising. Nothing like what we need or should have, but it's a beginning. It's challenging. There are many obstacles, and it's like running in place sometimes and not going anywhere. But it doesn't mean you stop running. So we'll continue to run our race.
Coming up, we conclude with radio trailblazer Carol Moore Cutting as she comes completely unguarded and admits to ICU that owners aren't looking to sell, they're actually hoping to take over Black-owned stations that are left and currently in operation. Plus, we wrap up our chat with Nikki Sworn, General Manager and Program Director of a trending Denver public radio operation known as The Drop, a station that's actually operating on a low-power translator, providing coverage to only a limited, isolated portion of the region. You do not want to miss this final segment of ICU as we pull back the curtain of the challenges that many are facing in diversifying media ownership. I'm Eddie Robinson. We'll be right back. It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Nikki Sworn, General Manager of a new digital and commercial radio station with an all-black staff based in Denver, Colorado, called The Drop, 104.7 FM. What do you see as the red flag or the reasoning behind there not being as many Black-owned stations as there could be? I mean, here we are in 2022, and 11,000 commercial radio stations are available, but yet and still just over 100 of them are Black owned. What's the bottleneck? What's the roadblock for Black ownership in media these days? What's your opinion?
I think honestly it's consolidation. I think there used to be a lot of independent radio stations like AM, FM, Citadel. Like there used to be just a lot of more opportunity, and there were a lot more frequencies available for folks to come in and purchase. When we got our translator, we're not even on a full power FM. We're on a translator.
This 104.7?
104.7 is a translator. It is not a full FM stick. And if you look at that and you look at the limitations of the number of signals available, limited by partially the FCC and partially by the economics of how much it costs to get engaged in this game, it's expensive.
Wow.
The financial commitment, knowing that you probably won't see a profit right away. How long can you sustain that reasonably and keep the lights on reasonably without support from other places? But really, the number one thing for me is market consolidation. iHeart, Odyssey, huge radio conglomerates. And they have it to a science. It's mathematics for them. If something's not working, they can see it not working in advance. They'll see it coming, and the plan for the flip will happen. And as a person sitting inside of it, you won't even know it's coming because you think everything is cool. But they're looking at a big, huge algorithm that's telling them what's predictive. What is it that we can predict based on this kind of music, with this kind of audience, with this kind of whatever it is we're pouring into it? This is what the output is. It's not about the individuals anymore. And that's the other part, I think, with radio is it's not about the listeners as much. It's not about our community connection as much. That's why we win, is because we're connected to community. They're telling us what they want, and we're listening, we're giving it back to them. Instead of going out and being like, oh, we worked out this great deal with this huge hotel conglomerate to offer a place for us to do our, yeah, but it's huge and it's massive and it's detrimental because what happens to the mom and pop? Like we're doing a toy drive. We're doing a food drive. We're doing a book drive. What happens to those things along the way? Those conversations. Oh, we're going to go empower this teacher by redoing their classroom. There's no room in the commercial model for that simplicity and that small of an impact that has huge impact overall. It's it's commercialization and consolidation.
Just a quick question about 104.7 and it being a translator. Wouldn't you want something a bit bigger, like a transmitter?
Heck yeah.
Is that something that...
Heck yeah, we wanted it, but it's not available.
It's not available.
I cannot tell. That's all around the FCC. The FCC, first of all, had to, and so the new decommissioning just happened, right? So the FCC said, okay, we are now, we're seeing an uneven playing field, and they recognize this, right? We've got a new FCC leader just coming to the table, and they know that there's a shortcoming within the community in terms of radio broadcasters. But it's two things. Yes, you can open up the opportunity for more people to come into it, but there has to be availability of the actual transmitter. And in Denver and in Colorado, in a major market number 18, there's no availability. Look, we're looking for it. We want it, but there's not one that's available. The fact that we got a translator, the fact that it even came through was a fluke. And it was only because somebody very, very rich who's really well known in our community wanted off radio because the pandemic hit and he couldn't make any money. And we got this thing for a deal. This is all the universe saying this is a necessity. And the history of the drought, it's unfathomable that this happened at the time it did. And my first concern, where I know the people at that station, in my whole heart was like, I don't want anybody out of work during the pandemic. Is this the right decision? I literally asked my CEO and my president CEO of our organization at Rocky Mountain Public Media and the board, is this the right decision for us to make? Because I don't want to see anybody out of a job. And they were like, Nikki, this is business. And we care about our community. And we have an opportunity to better serve a community of color in a way that nobody else is going to be able to do this. I respect you so much for having concern for other people. That speaks highly to your leadership skill and your value to us as a team. We want to land on this. We want the opportunity. We want to be able to provide a place for a voice. And that kind of gave me some solace. And then that station landed on something else real quick, like within 3 weeks. So everything worked out really good. That also doesn't happen. They also moved to another translator, right? So it's just not available. And I looked because when the FCC sent down the notice, hey, this is 15 years, I think, had gone by for this kind of licensing agreements to be out. We went full force to try to find a full strength FM. Not available in Denver's market. Nobody's giving up their sticks. No one. Like, look, we will struggle and only have one person on the air 24 hours a day. But we're not going to give it up because the value is too great. And the average rate, I mean, you're looking at over a couple $1 million to start. With nothing. That's just some string and wire, right? So we're just trying to get on anywhere we can. That's the other piece of that. So it may not be the most ideal situation. A translator is not, because we know it's not the same full power, right? And if a full power FM, so we're really close to 104.3, which is our sports station, The Fan, right? I know all the people over there. I know Bob Call, I know Jim. I came from there, right?
Does their signal sometimes bleed into 104.7?
No, it would be us encroaching, because we cranked, right? It would be us encroaching on them, and they could come back against us and say, you need to power down. And so, and it would be us who would have to power down, not them. We encroach in them. They don't encroach on us, ever, because they're a full strength FM. Even if they are encroaching on us, we still can't say anything. We just got to take it.
Thank you so much for being a guest on ICU.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. These conversations are critical to our community. Recently, I think it's Edison Research came out with the impact of podcasts in community of color, and especially with women of color, African American women in particular. And these messages and seeing ourselves reflected in media is paramount. We need to have more conversations. We need to have more opportunities and more places where we can exchange our ideas and thoughts and be healthy through it. You know, this is a big service you're doing. Eddie, thank you so much. We appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we are hoping that this episode can do just that. That was Nikki Sworn, General Manager and Program Director of Denver's The Drop, 104.7 FM. Nikki Sworn, it's been a pleasure. We're hoping this episode puts a major spotlight on why decades have gone by and there's still only a limited number of Black-owned radio stations in this country, and to raise awareness for those owners of media properties and frequencies to share the media pie with those broadcast minorities eager to connect with their own culture and identities through station ownership and management to a radio industry that certainly needs more creativity and innovation. It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson as we conclude our discussion right here with final remarks by radio pioneer Carol Moore Cutting of Cutting Edge Broadcasting. What should be our steps to diversify the dial? How can people support the initiative of Black-owned stations, more Black-owned stations, in your mind?
In my mind, there has to be greater awareness of the fact that we're fewer and fewer in numbers. What you're doing now is bringing attention to it. I think more attention has to be brought to it. We've got great broadcasters throughout this country that are servicing our communities. They're not getting the credit for what they're doing. And in fact, some of those communities are taking it for granted, and you really cannot take our existence for granted, because although we exist today, there are forces out there now to want to squash those voices, because the fewer voices they have on the airwaves that speak to inequities, that speak to the need for community, that speak to the need of diversity, it's not going to happen without it.
Have any white-owned stations or conglomerates revealed to you why there may be a sense of reluctance on their part to sell off media interests or property to someone who's a minority?
No, they're trying to get those properties themselves, simply because in this community, we have all kinds of obstacles and challenges. And I often get calls about wanting to talk to me and have coffee with me. I don't drink coffee, so I don't want to talk to you anyway. Not only that, but it's a way of trying to diminish the number of properties, I think, based on my experience. And whatever they can do to accomplish that, they'll do it. Whether it's increasing twofold the price of if you are renting on their tower, knowing that that is way out of line for the existing rental fees for a broadcast tower, just making it very, very difficult, thinking that if we can, even price you out of the process and make it so difficult that you can't survive, then we'll just take it over.
Are these tax incentives the only real solution out there to attract more owners to consider selling off their majority interest to people of color? Is that the only solution?
Well, we know there are no frequencies available. So that automatically tells you that if they're in the hands of other people, are they going to sell them to you? When it comes to advertising, they see the bigger broadcasting companies being able to do more for them than they do a community-based radio station. And by the way, we're the only locally owned commercial FM radio station in the Springfield, Massachusetts metro market. And although you use that as a pitch, they don't care, or they don't see the value in it. And we have to see value in it for ourselves. This is no easy game. And it's like, okay, we're moving. Can't believe this month is leaving us so fast, and it'll be the first of the month again. Oh my God.
That's it.
The rent is due, the tower lease is due. So they just flipped around and said, okay, we want you off. We can't force you off. We'll just basically raise the rent to the point of you're finding it difficult to pay us. And then we'll put in the clause, if you don't pay us by a certain time, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like every month, I mean, COVID or what have you, it's a challenge. But let's just say I stay on my knees morning, noon, and night.
She has a remarkable corner of the world, WEIB, and President, CEO, and General Manager of Cutting Edge Broadcasting. Her name is Carol Moore Cutting. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we see you right here on our show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and tune in to WEIBFM.com.
You've been listening to I See You. Our team includes Technical Director Todd Halslander, Producer Laura Burks, Editors Mark DeClaudio and Matt Biera, Sound Designer Dave McDermott. I See You is a production of Houston Public Media. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And for more updates and episodes, visit our website, iseeushow.org. I'm your host and executive producer, Eddie Robinson. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, I feel you, we hear you, I see you.